All right, here we are. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to slowly let a few more people come into the room. I hope everyone's well. So we've just opened the call and people will be joining us slowly. While you're waiting, make sure you've got yourself a glass of water, maybe some snacks to enjoy while we're tasting this whiskey. All right. I think we'll start. Right, well, welcome to this month's edition of Whiskey Wednesdays with Jack Dukisevich. Luckily for us, we have a special guest joining us all the way from UK, Brendan Mccarron. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure it's a whiskey breakfast for you. I'm sure it's very early for you. My name is Ardbeg Dukisevich, and I'll be assisting my dad, Jack Dukisevich, this evening. Currently, we're set up here at our Jervois store on our spirit store on Jervois Road, and this is where Glengarry wines first started back in 1940s. My great-grandfather started the business, and as a fourth generation today, I'm very happy to be able to share that story with everybody. So there's a few of us online tonight, and it's great to see. So to go over the overall flow of the night, we're going to be opening up a chat bar, which you can find on the lower banner if you just toggle the chat. As we go through the whiskies tonight, you can send in any questions that you have, and then after we go through the whiskies, we can open the chat and I'll select a few questions. But at the end of the tasting, I'm going to be opening up the chat, which you can unmute yourself for about 10 minutes and we can have a discussion to round the night up and add any questions that you might have before we wrap up the night. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Jack and Brendan.
Hello, all. Hope you can all hear me. And really glad to have you all dial in here. We have the Auckland Ardbeg Embassy here at Glengarry's Spirit Store. We've got dinners alongside us next door, so that's where we want to start. So we're going to have a little bit of a tour through some wonderful whiskies with Brendan, and we're trying to hear some of your insights, Brendan. And thanks for joining us. It's a real privilege for us to have you, dialing in here this wee hours in Scotland. So welcome on board.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. It's great to be with you again. It would be much better if I was there in person. I think I've been to see you 3 times now. So let's just hope that this crazy year's a one-off, and this time next year or early in 2021 we can actually be in the same place, drinking some really nice whiskey in your amazing venue. But for now, we are on Zoom. So a couple of points up front. So I'll introduce myself, ladies and gents. My name's Brendan Mccarron. I recognise a few faces coming up in the Zoom who I've met, but just in case, I'm the head of Maturing Whisky Stocks for Ardbeg. So what does that mean? I guess it means I'm one of the whiskey makers. So my boss is our master blender or master distiller. My boss is Dr. Bill Lumsden, a very famous name in the whiskey industry, and he hired me 6 years ago as a potential successor to him. So if I do everything right and if I meet all of the requirements, then eventually Bill is going to choose to step down. Now that might be soon or it might be late. It might be sooner or it might be later. It doesn't really matter to me, but I'm there as his probably likely successor. So my job involves pretty much everything to do with making whiskey, from buying raw materials, buying barley, buying casks, doing sensory analysis. So I nose and taste every sample of whiskey that we have, be that new make spirit coming off of the still before it goes into casks, be that Whiskies as they're maturing. So for a 10-year-old Ardbeg, we might check the whiskey at 3 years, 6 years, 7 years, something like that. I get to know all of that. And I also check every batch of mature whiskey we put together before it's released out into the world. So it's a pretty cool job, if I say so myself. And it's also made working from home, which a lot of us are doing right now. It's made it pretty interesting. My dining room, as my wife keeps reminding me, my dining room is now one of the most flammable places on earth, I would say, because there's just hundreds and thousands of little samples of whiskey in there because it's slowly building up over time. So that's me. I also help to make new whiskies from time to time. So I was quite heavily involved in the concept, the design, the formulation of Wee Beastie. So I have been working on this. It's a 5-year-old whiskey, and I guess you could say I've been working on this whiskey for over 5 years. So something that I'm very proud of, really happy with how it turned out. So maybe keep that in mind if you don't like Wee Beastie. First of all, I'll be amazed if you don't like it, but also if you don't like it, I put 5 years of my life into making it. So if you're going to criticise it, maybe just make sure you're on mute, you know, because it's early in the morning. You don't want to see a Scotsman crying. The other thing I'm going to say is, so not only is it's 8:15 a.m. here in Scotland, so I'm in Stirling in Scotland, but also you're probably hearing I have a little bit of a cold. So my son has just started going back to nursery. So obviously every kid has been away from other children for a little while, so they're all getting colds now. So I'm probably going to have a cold from now until 2022, 2023, but something like that. But they'll probably hear I'm a little bit bunged up, and for the same reason, I'm not going to be drinking the whiskies because I can't really smell anything right now. I need to get this cleared before I can go back to work. But I do know these whiskies intimately. I love these whiskies, and I love to talk about them. So trust me, I'll be able to bring it to life, and who cares if I'm drinking or not? It's all about you enjoying the whiskies that you have out there. Right, that's a chat from me. Jack, will we jump right in with the new one?
Yeah, we've got a little movie that Harold's going to run for us.
What's that, sorry?
We've got a little movie.
Oh, yes. So we're going to start off with the new release. Normally you wait to the end, but it's the 5-year-old Ardbeg, and we're thinking, let's jump right in with that one. So we're going to start with a little movie first.
Right, hopefully the sound comes through.
What's he not?
Is that sound coming through there?
No, from me.
Sorry. Just see if I can. Oh, sorry.
It's going to take a while.
Let's just see if I can quickly get this going. Excellent.
Awesome. Who's shorting?
Look at that. That was awesome.
I can go here. It looks really cool. The sound wasn't very good here, but we've got like just that.
So, I've got the bottle right here. So I know it's out in New Zealand already. It's now out globally, but this is the newest Ardbeg in the range. So this is our 5-year-old Ardbeg. There's a few reasons. So we kind of like being controversial, or not so much controversial, but kind of bucking trends in the whiskey industry. Ardbeg is always a little bit different. So it's super smoky, but at the same time as being super smoky, it's also a very sweet and very balanced whiskey. We tend to have a lot of our products, our cheapest product for the longest time was the 10-year-old, even though it was the only one that had age. But again, we've just tried to do something that's completely different. And what we're doing here is making this whiskey the Wee Beastie. The reason it's called Wee Beastie, so it's a sort of term in Scotland, you know, a bit of a monster. And it's because when you make Ardbeg, the smokiest Ardbeg you'll ever get, people tend to get hung up on the ppm, which makes sense, how many phenols were on the malt. But that's just how smoky you make the spirit. The maturation process of Ardbeg, actually it's slow, but slowly over time, you see the smoke start to drop away. So if you've been lucky enough to taste the 19-year-old Ardbeg, the Trivan, you'll notice that, although it's still a big smoky whiskey, it's less smoky than a 10, for example. It's more elegant and it has more roundness, and it's because longer maturations of Ardbeg actually take away some of the more intense smokes and make it an altogether more approachable sort of smoky whiskey. And with this one, with the Wee Beastie, we're deliberately turning it on its head. So that's why we thought it was super important to put an age statement on it and to let people know that this is a young, untamed beast of a whiskey. So making it half the age of the Ardbeg 10 makes it way smokier, because you're just not given much opportunity for any of the smoke that we've added to this spirit on Islay. You're not given much opportunity for it to escape and get out into the ether. You're keeping it all in, and it's almost like, you know, when this bottle gets bottled, it's shaking, you know, because everything's trying to escape. It's kind of like a whiskey that's alive, basically. So if you have it in front of you, I'd encourage you to pour yourself a wee dram of Wee Beastie. This 5-year-old, super smoky, very intense whiskey that, and it's important to say this, it's a permanent addition to the Ardbeg range. And the reason I need to stress that is, for the longest time, we've been releasing sort of one-off batches of Ardbeg, and that's because we're so limited on the stock that we have due to the distillery being closed for all of the 80s pretty much, and for most of the 90s being on low production. We've just never really had any spare stock. We bought the distillery in 1997, and it's taken until now to very slowly and carefully and calmly bring this distillery back up and back to life. And for the longest time, I mean, I make Ardbeg now, but I've been drinking Ardbeg as a fan for 20 years. And I've always been limited to just 3 expressions, the 10, the Uigeadail and the Corryvreckan. And that's because that's all that we could make. It's all that we had the stock for. But we're getting into like a really exciting time for Ardbeg. We still have those 3 expressions. We also have Ardbeg and O, but we now have the opportunity. It's still very small amounts of stock, but we have the opportunity to make a permanent 19-year-old, and we now have this permanent 5-year-old as well. So there's just way more opportunities to experiment and to find different flavour profiles and different intensities inside each whiskey. So hopefully you're nosing and tasting away at the Ardbeg Wee Beastie right now. And what you should be noticing at that 5-year-old and 47.4% ABV, you should pick up that it is sort of a grade up in terms of smokiness. So that smoke could present as wood smoke. It should be quite medicinal, something like antiseptic lozenges coming through on the nose. Quite salty as well, so sea salt or just that kind of maritime sea air freshness should come through. But quite quickly, you will pick up there's a sweetness in there as well. You get something, you know, red chilies mixed together with sort of chili infused chocolate possibly, and maybe even a little bit of coffee in there as well. And the reason for that is this whiskey is matured in ex-bourbon barrels, like Ardbeg Drum, but it also has quite a large proportion, larger than you would probably expect, proportion of Oloroso sherry matured Ardbeg, fully matured in Oloroso sherry. And what it's doing is it's kind of in the background. These Oloroso sherries are kind of holding the beast together, holding it from escaping, because my original ambition for this whiskey is I wanted to make it 3 years old, and I wanted it matured only in ex-bourbon barrels that had been refilled. So I wanted to make this like the rawest Ardbeg ever. That was the initial idea. But in truth, every time I tasted the 3 versus the 5 just came out better. And with a little bit of sherry influence, with a reasonable package of sherry, you kind of take away any edges that are so rough that they might be unpleasant. But what you do leave behind is you still leave behind this kind of untamed, big, bold expression of Ardbeg. You get, you know, pepper and sea salt, medicine and smoke, chili, some chocolate. It's an amazing whiskey, we think, and it just shows how Ardbeg is so different and so individual in a world of very similar malts. Younger can be better, older can be more refined. It just sort of bucks the trend for all kind of whiskies. So you'll see with this whiskey that priced younger than the 10. So I know we're getting a lot of really positive responses for how well priced it is. Some people are starting to say, so this is a whiskey designed for cocktails. Now, I guess it is suitable for cocktails because it has that raw power, and also it has a price point, if you went straight into a sort of business sense of it, that bars can make some really good cocktails at good flavour, at good prices. But don't forget, this is first and foremost a single malt whiskey from Ardbeg. It is absolutely drinkable neat. It's super enjoyable. It's also great with like 1 rock of ice. It just makes something incredible happen to this whiskey, in my opinion. I just seen someone ask a question, is anyone getting like a leathery note as well? And yeah, absolutely. There is that kind of something like leather, or like antique furniture, or like almost like old wooden boats, or even like varnish for. It's like a classic phenolic note. So that again is coming from this extra supercharged level of phenols inside this whiskey.
Thank you, Brendan.
A brand new monster of a dram. And if you stick with that leathery note, what you'll also get is almost like savoury meats. So you should find something, you know, like dry cured hams or pastrami's or something like that should come through. Jerky, yeah, right on cue, right on cue. All of these kind of flavours, something that's just a wee bit chewier, a wee bit longer lasting, and definitely those kind of savoury notes to balance off the sweetness.
Can I follow up, Brendan, on that for a second? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. It's quite quiet, Jack, but I can just about hear you.
Okay. We have our director here just having a look at that. I find it very young, vibrant, and herbal. It's exciting. It's I've heard so many comments in the media about how huge and hefty it is, and the expected beast and things like that. But all I'm getting is the opposite, really. I'm really enjoying it. That's amazing.
Yeah, so I think sometimes when we're talking about phenols, sometimes people think just of, you know, smoke, that very obvious smoke flavour. So maybe something that you would get in, well, just on Islay, that smell of peat smoke. But the phenols present in many different ways. So it is very smoky. It is very much got that wood smoke, but it also has medicinal notes, herbal notes, salty notes, savoury meat notes. And all of these notes are phenols. All of these notes are these kind of smoky aromas. And it's another great way to experiment with the flavour profile of smoky whiskey, because usually people think either you take non-peated malt, medium peated malt, heavily peated malt, and that of course is the most obvious way to change how phenolic your whiskey is. But with this way, it's just a way of showing like variations in age and in the types of cask you mature with. They make something really special.
It's very forward on the mouth, that's right, on the tip of your tongue as well. I love young peaty whiskies, and because they just deliver so much up front, and this has it all. I love the whiskey that's right on the tip of your tongue as well.
Yeah, they give you like I almost get it. It's almost like it sort of dances on the palate, so you can just find different parts of your tongue sort of activating at different times, almost like when you were a kid and you got those little popping candy sweets that explode in your mouth and make a noise, or like something extra peppery, you know, you just get this kind of explosion on the palate when you drink it. Yeah, I'm getting some really good comments here, so thank you. I'm glad everyone's enjoying it, which is great. It's good to hear those 5+ years in life weren't wasted, Rachel. Thank you for that. But yeah, that's like our newest whiskey. And I think it is important to stress, because I'm sure everyone here is like huge Ardbeg fans, and you're used to an Ardbeg coming, selling out, and then we say that we're not repeating it. But we've done the calculations, you know, we've looked at the stock profile, we're buying the right casks. We won't be able to make, you know, endless amounts of this whiskey, but we will be making it so that it's always on shelf, it's always available, something that you can reach for and buy whenever you want to try something that's a little bit more intense. It's got a completely different smoky flavour profile. Yeah, it's just something that's really enjoyable to try.
I can imagine that people might call it entry level or beginners peaty whiskey, but to me it will stand on its own 2 feet, and I think that it will be well deserved, because it's a different profile. You know, would have loved to have tried it at Cask Street. What was it like when it came out of the cask?
Yeah, it's pretty ropey.
Ropey. That's like,
you know, as I say, like my initial idea for this whiskey, which is about 6 years ago, it was to do a 3-year-old whiskey, because that 3-year-old in a day, you know, because that'd be as smoky as it legally would be allowed to be, and then also in refill casks and at high strength. And in truth, it was smokier than this, but it wasn't better than this. You know, we want to make it really smoky, but it needs to be an amazing whiskey and an enjoyable experience. And that one just wasn't right, Jack. It just wasn't. So that's why we pushed the age a little to 5, and we put this kind of undercurrent, this in the background, doing the heavy lifting element of sherry casks that just rounded off the roughest edges and the immaturity that had the potential to come through in the whiskey. And it just makes something that's altogether enjoyable. Now, where a brand new smoky whiskey drinker to walk into Glengarry's and ask for a recommendation where to start with Ardbeg, I would probably still direct them to Ardbeg 10 or to Ardbeg Anno. So I would say, look, I know these are a little bit more expensive and they're a little bit older than the 5-year-old, but this is where I would start. And if you love it and you want to come back, here's another one, but it's going to kick it up a level, but it's another one to try. But I still think the best intro to Ardbeg is either by surprise, when people just discover it randomly, and that tends to be where people just go nuts, or if it's a recommendation, I would still say 10 or Anno would be the place to begin your journey and find out if you like it or not.
We don't want to burn them off too fast.
Yeah, exactly. Some people, you're always going to terrify with Ardbeg, and we accept that. It's not a whiskey for everyone. Some people just cannot get used to it, but you might as well give them a fair chance to like it. So I would start Anno or 10, definitely.
Well, it's quite an experience having your first Ardbeg. I can only just really remember it. It was about 30 years ago, but I was like, what?
So if everyone's enjoying Ardbeg Anno, what I would also recommend, so I did mention cocktails there briefly. So if you don't like single malt whiskey and cocktails, that's fine. You don't need to. But I do from time to time. And with lockdown, with bars being closed, I've actually got a bit better at making cocktails as well. My 2 strong recommendations for this whiskey. First one is all Ardbegs, and we're going to find this out as we taste our way through the rest of the range, but all Ardbegs have this kind of lime juice, bitter, sweet acidity to them. It comes from the fermentation in wooden washbacks at Islay. And then the purifier that we use in our distillery, we have like this little funky purifier that just sort of adds a little bit of copper contact to all our spirit. So it gives you the chance underneath the smoke to find slight bits of citrus, especially lime. As a result, Ardbeg tends to make amazing daiquiris, and it makes amazing sours as well. So daiquiris and sours work great with Ardbeg, and they work amazing, unsurprisingly, with Wee Beastie, because it has the power to kind of shine through all of these ingredients. And then the last thing that Ardbeg makes, which is great, and a lot of people know this, but if you don't, you're in for a treat. But basically take all the vodka in your house and, you know, burn it or something. No, I'm only kidding. Vodka's good for some stuff. But you no longer need to use vodka for your Bloody Marys. So Wee Beastie makes the best Bloody Mary you've ever had. So I could actually murder one right now because it's acceptable to have Bloody Marys in the morning, but I'm going to resist. But if you want to try those out, you're going to find something amazing in these whiskies.
What's tomorrow?
Okay, will we move on?
Pardon?
You want to move on? Would you want next Ardbeg 10?
Yeah, just well done, Brendan. I think
thank you.
I learned friends that have joined me here. I think are all nodding their heads. And okay, yeah, well done. Ropey, yeah, best word. No.
Yeah, we're getting really, really good comments here. So Gabrielle, Fernand, Simon, there's so many of them. It's kind of hard to keep up. Nick, bacon for me, Nick. Well, Nick, just wait until we try Uigeadail. If you're getting bacon and Wee Beastie, you're basically going to get the entire pig by the time you get to Uigeadail. Beautiful evolution with that sweet cabin fire smoke on the back of the tongue from Cara. So Cara, that's a good point. What Cara's saying is you get this evolution, you get a bit of sweetness coming through. That's why we made the decision to add the Oloroso sherry cask to the Wee Beastie. We really, for ages, we were trying to keep it about being just raw and smoky. And we did that, but it wasn't as good as being raw, smoky, and then developing into something else. So it's great that you're picking that up. And yeah, glad it's a permanent member of the range. So are we. I mean, we didn't make Ardbeg very limited and just 3 expressions for forever deliberately. This wasn't some dramatic business move. This wasn't some, fake scarcity thing that we did. It just was genuinely a factor of Ardbeg's complicated history and the fact that it almost went out of business. Ardbeg almost disappeared in the mid-1990s because no one really liked that intense flavour profile. So it's been a bit of a miracle and a resurgence, but we're finally coming out the other end, and it looks like we can confidently lay down some spirit because we know that we have fans out in the world who want to try Ardbeg at different, amounts.
Well done. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I've just seen a last comment there. Penicillins for this would be amazing. So yeah, penicillins. So Ardbeg is part of the same company as Glenmorangie. So I get to make Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. So that's the way that I get to bring these 2 whiskies together. So Glenmorangie plus Ardbeg makes this incredible penicillin. And then randomly, before I was a whiskey maker, before I joined the whiskey industry, For 2 years, I worked in pharmaceuticals. So genuinely, I used to make penicillin for a living, but the actual drug penicillin. So penicillin cocktails sort of brings my entire career together quite nicely, I like to think. So I've rabbited on there, and please just keep the questions coming. I'm keeping an eye on the chat coming up, which is great. But will we move on and try some of the classic Ardbeg 10?
Yes. I hope you've all got the little tasting mat all set up in front of you, and moving now from the Wee Beastie to round to your right, the 10-year-old, if you're in the centre.
I'm going to go through, I take it you all have a tasting mat in front of you and you all know what we're going to try, but we're just going to run through some of our classic Ardbegs, because why wouldn't you? Yes, well done, Gav, just seen you hold it up. So why would you not? And it's just, this is a good way to see how the smoke changes, how the flavour develops. And then at the end, just for a special treat, we're going to taste the Ardbeg Drum, which is one of our previous Ardbeg Day releases. And the reason we're doing Drum is this year, we didn't get the chance to have an Ardbeg Day. You know, Ardbeg Day was pretty much cancelled, sadly. You know, no one could travel to the Feish on Islay. So what we did is we did like a virtual Ardbeg Day. And obviously Dr. Bill, my boss, was doing most of it and running it. But he asked me to just do a presentation on one of my most memorable or one of my most favourite Ardbeg days. And I did Drum. So that's why I thought we would just add Ardbeg Drum to the end of this tasting, just as like a special thank you for coming and attending, and just something nice to remind ourselves of how Ardbeg can change again, this time using different casks. So,
also, Brendan, obviously we were awarded the status of an Ardbeg Embassy in 2019, the year that the drum was released, and we had a wonderful party here with the Caribbean drummers out front and the tropical theme, and there was bananas and pineapples floating around, and the place is all dressed up. So it'll be wonderful memories for us here in Glengarry and Auckland of the release of the drum. And I bought heaps of it, so I've got some stock left to sell you. So you want to,
yeah. So let's pick up Big 10. I mean, this one is, this is like we always say like the flagship of the distillery, and I wish there was a better word. You know, it's absolutely Ardbeg in its most classic form. So this whiskey, more than any other whiskey we make, shows off everything that Ardbeg stands for. So at Ardbeg, there's a few things we're trying to achieve. We are, of course, an Islay single malt. Our distillery's been there since 1815. You could almost throw a hat over 3 of the most iconic smoky whiskies in the world, with let's start Laphroaig, Lagavulin and Ardbeg, all being within 2 miles of each other. So it's really uncanny to see how close together these 3 absolute powerhouses of Islay smoky whiskies are. I used to live on Islay. I used to be in charge of Lagavulin, and I used to also make heavily smoked malted barley for all 3 distilleries. So I feel a real connection to Islay, but I lived for 3 years of my life, and also to like iconic big smoky whiskies. And Lagavulin, Laphroaig and Ardbeg are all similar. So I'm promoting the competition here, but if you love Ardbeg, you will really love also Lagavulins and Laphroaigs, so they're worth trying. But what makes Ardbeg stand out to me is partly that history, this complicated history, because it is smokier, it has a bigger intensity, and it also has this kind of funky, unusual texture and citrusy, sweet flavour in the background. So it has this slightly more unusual style, I would say, than probably the revered Lagavulin and the smoke-focused Laphroaig. The other things that make Ardbeg special is super small. You know, small doesn't mean better, so don't think I'm saying the smaller your distillery, the better the quality. That's a bit of a myth. That's a bit of a very easy theory that exists in the world of whiskey and basically the world of anything. But what's cool about Ardbeg is it's pretty much unchanged since 1815. So in the late 1800s, Ardbeg was making 1 million litres of alcohol. This year, it makes 1 million litres of alcohol. So it's basically been the same size ever since it began. And in fact, we're going to expand Ardbeg Distillery next year, and it's going to double in size. So it's going to go from being 1 million litres of whiskey to being 2 million litres of whiskey. So it's still one of the smallest distilleries on the island, and it's the first expansion in 205 years. So kind of a felt like time. But at that distillery, what you have is you have super smoky malted barley. So we're looking at 55 parts per million. We mature in wooden washbacks, and with wooden washbacks, you can never sterilize them. So you can never fully clear out all of the yeast and the other flavor-forming flora and fauna. So you start to build up this unique fermentation characteristic, and that shows up as almost like something that's slightly oily and slightly soapy and slightly funky. I can't really think of a better word than, you know, dank or funky or just a bit different. And then, as I've already mentioned, we have this purifier on the spirit still. So you get this just a little bit of extra copper contact, a little bit of more polish. And what it leaves you with is it leaves you with Ardbeg new make spirit, which is, frankly, not the best. It's not super drinkable, the new make spirit at Ardbeg. Now, it's 100% perfect quality, but it's so smoky, and it's metallic, and it's vegetal, and it's rough, and it's ready. That's why you need to mature it. It doesn't take long to mature, interestingly. All these sort of really quite rough and ready flavours break down quickly and evolve into something beautiful. But right up front, it's an in-your-face spirit, let me just say. But then if you take that spirit and you mature it for 10 years in ex-bourbon barrels, now we'll use a little bit of first fill ex-bourbon barrels. First fill bourbon barrels are going to be the most powerful, so they're going to add the most oaky flavours. We use second fill barrels, and we also use refill barrels, so barrels that have been used 3 or 4 times. And it's a balance of all of these different ex-bourbon barrels that create the Ardbeg 10-year-old. So we want it to be 10 years old, of course, by law that's required, but we don't want it to be overly woody, you know? We still want 60% of the flavour at least to be of the distillery. Basically, this glass of whiskey, if I open up this bottle and just have a little smell, so with this cold, I'm getting basically nothing. I'm too blocked up. But what I know is when I don't have a cold, when I drink Ardbeg 10, this whiskey takes me right back to the distillery, because it's raw, it's salty, it's maritime, it has some smokiness to it. So it's like Ardbeg Distillery is right on the sea, and this whiskey just reminds me of standing on Ardbeg Distillery's grounds with the sea air blowing in. It's also slightly herbal, so it's quite grassy. It's quite earthy as well. There's this sort of earthy, mucky note to the background, and it just reminds me of Islay so much. So salty, smoky, earthy, almost this smell of like hot tarmac, the road, just that beautiful smell, fresh. It's an amazing whiskey. It's probably still my favourite Ardbeg, and in fact, it might well be my favourite whiskey ever. You know, never ever commit fully to a favourite whiskey ever, because I haven't tried them all, and it also depends a lot on experience and stuff. But I have the fondest memories, I think, of Ardbeg 10 over any other whiskey that I've ever drank. I just love the rawness, the intensity, but then also take a second or a third sip, and as you get used to the smoke, you really start to find that kind of grilled lime juice, tartness, sweetness, and bitterness that just cuts through the smoke and kind of balances everything off.
Well said, Brendan. I really love listening to you describe what something that you're so passionate about, and what I really get from the way that you describe it so well is I now, you know, more and more understand why Ardbeg drinkers become a little bit obsessed, because it has a uniqueness about it, and it's all about that balance and delivering those flavours. Okay, it might be the smokiest and the peatiest, but it doesn't come across as that, you know. It's quite alcoholic, but also doesn't come across as spiritus. And Ardbeg lovers always talk about its uniqueness and its balance. And yeah, the 10-year-old is the epitome of that. I love listening to your descriptors. They all sing a note with me. It was wonderful.
Good. That's always a good sign. But yeah, I know that. I know from meeting you quite a few times that we're like-minded. We have similar sort of opinions on whiskey, let's just say, before we go too controversial, but also on like what makes a great whiskey and what makes a good one, and the stuff that we're not so interested in, isn't it, Jack? And I've also seen Cara is asking, I'm getting almost like a sour note, slightly watery in the background of the Ardbeg 10. It's coming from the fermentation. That's what I get is lime juice, but it's not just lime juice. There's a sweetness, but also a bitterness to it, which, you know, bitter and sour are pretty similar flavours. So it's fermentation in wooden washbacks and then carefully maturing it to make sure that that flavour gets a chance to come through rather than getting hidden. Like, you know, if you use casks that were too strong, you would kind of hide it away. But it's encouraging that flavour to come out. But it's very much yeast and these other flora and fauna, bugs, frankly, that create all these different flavours. So, which one's next, Jack? Are we going to, is it Anno?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, nice. So I think Nick Keane, who's on, has already called me out on this, but I'm quite biased about Anno. So Ardbeg Anno, which is the next one we're going to try, and again, it's Anno. You don't pronounce that's really hard to do on Zoom actually. You don't pronounce this final A, so it's just Anno. And if there's two things we're obsessed about Ardbeg, the first is making incredible smoky whiskey. That's mission number one. And probably mission number two is making sure that all of our whiskies are unpronounceable. It's like just our thing. We're determined that you have not a chance of being able to pronounce our whiskies. I don't know why we do it. Maybe we're just arses. Who knows? But it seemed like a good idea at the time. It's just Scottish Gaelic has many, many, many vowels in it. But if I can turn this round, does that show in the camera there? There's a map of Islay. I don't know if that's showing okay or not. But on this map of Islay, you can see Ardbeg is at the bottom here. And then just here, I'm going to leave my finger here, then I'm going to take it away. But you're looking for like a soccer ball shaped peninsula. Just at the bottom of Islay there. That is an O. And it's called an O because when you look at a map of Islay, it looks like an O. It just looks like an O. So it's as clear as that. And this place on Islay is amazing. So genuinely, when I lived in Islay at the start of the millennium. So no, that's not true. The start of the tens. So I moved there in 2011, and I lived there till 2014. So this is long before Anno was even a concept as a whiskey. But Anno is this area of Islay that's very quiet, even for Islay, which is obviously a very quiet island. But it's also an interesting place in Islay in that so you have this big circular crop of very fertile land. But it's also the only part in Islay where you have cliffs. So it's the only part of Islay where you actually have this dramatic cliff and you can look over the edge down at the water because the rest of Islay just sort of naturally meanders into the sea. So what it gives you is this kind of contrast. So it's a rough and stormy and wild part of Islay because it takes the brunt of the winds coming in off the Atlantic Ocean. But on top of Anno, you also get this very fertile land. So it's quite sweet. There's lots of botanicals and slowberries and juniper that grow there, and thistle and herbs. So you get this really sweet and gentle area at the top, and then these cliff faces that are salty, dangerous, and pretty intense. And really, this was not contrived. But when we made Ardbeg Anno, as it got closer to being a final product, it's a story of contrast. And so it just made sense to name it after this area of Islay. So with Anno, this was the 4th permanent Ardbeg to be made. And with this one, it was inspired, I guess, by the rawness of Ardbeg 10. So Ardbeg 10 is raw, smoky, and then a little bit sweet. But for a lot of people, that can be just too much, you know? So I guess we'd say that sometimes some people taste Ardbeg 10 and they're just like, it's too raw, it's too intense. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to balance. We wanted to balance Ardbeg 10 and give people something to compare and contrast it to. So that was the initial inspiration for Anno. Let's have something that stands alongside Ardbeg 10 for people to compare and contrast. Uigeadail and Corryvreckan can't do that for one obvious reason. There's many reasons, but one obvious reason is the strength. So Uigeadail's 54.2 and Corryvreckan's 57.1. So that was the first thing that was given as a clue for making this whiskey was, let's make one that's a similar ABV. So Anno is 46.6. And I'll explain the extra 0.6 in a minute. But this project, as Nick's already called out, I'm quite biased about because this was my first project on Ardbeg. So this was the first whiskey that I got to make under Dr. Bill's supervision, of course. But this was the first one where he really tested me to see if I knew what I was doing, if I understood casks, if I understood flavours, how was I going to construct this whiskey. So the way I started was just by going to Ardbeg and going through the warehouse, just going through all of the warehouses and just looking for what whiskies I had. It's basically like like a chef going into the larder and seeing what ingredients do you have to cook dinner that night with. So I went to Ardbeg, I had a list of all the casks. I was like, get me some samples of older whiskey and bourbon, younger whiskey and first fill bourbon, what sherries do we have, what wines do we have, and so on and so forth. Now, I found some old alligator casks, which tempted me a little bit. I found some remnants of some other private collection whiskies that we'd made, some Ardbeg days. But really, the first bit of luck that I got when I was making Anno is I had a list of casks that were just on the system as sherry. So they were listed as sherry. Now, that was unusual. They should have been listed as, you know, Oloroso, because that's the most common sherry. But they were 8 years old, something like that, which Craig, who's asking a question, what's the age of Anno? It's really hard to communicate on a non-aged whiskey. You're not really allowed to say by law. But if you're hearing me talk here, I found these sherry casks that were about, they were 8 years old. That should give you a general idea of the younger whiskies in this Anno. But I thought they were sherry. I assumed, because it just said sherry, these will be Oloroso sherry casks. And it was Dugga. So if any of you have been to Islay, you'll know Dugga, our warehouse manager. But he actually pointed out, he went, those aren't Olorosos. He says that's fully matured Ardbeg and Pedro Jimenez. So there was a very small release of an Ardbeg called Diablo. It was 2 casks of Ardbeg matured in Pedro Jimenez, which had came out right at the beginning of the Fèis. But Dr. Bill had bought a load of Pedro Jimenez, and some of them had been filled with Ardbeg New Make Spirit. And this was me finding these casks 8 years later. So that was like my first bit of luck. And I pulled samples of those casks. And I'll admit that at that point I thought, this is it. This is the new whiskey. Because it was incredible, incredible whiskey. It tasted of dark chocolate. It tasted of plums. It tasted of like the sweetest, most intense plums. Now, admittedly, these plums had been stored in a fruit shop that was on fire because they were quite smoky, but sweet plums, a little bit of smoke. It got rum and raisin was the thing that sticks in my head. I can almost remember right now the exact place I was in, the flavours, the experience of drinking this sample for the first time and properly writing my tasting notes. But it was rum and raisin ice cream, real high quality rum and raisin ice cream. You know that artisan stuff that has a little bit of sea salt on top of it? And once you put that little bit of sea salt on, you can charge double the price because it just makes everything better. But it was like that kind of rum and raisin ice cream. It was amazing. But the big problem was it just wasn't that smoky. It wasn't that smoky because the PX is such a big, flavourful cask. It's almost like the smoke had got stuck in that sticky, sweet sherry and it wouldn't shine through. So this whiskey would be good enough to release as, say, an Ardbeg Day, or it'd be great to release as a one-off because you can explain to people this one won't be as smoky. But when I showed it to Dr. Bill, he said, it's amazing, but are you sure when we release the 4th permanent Ardbeg ever, are you comfortable with it not being that smoky? So again, it was like, he's right, he's absolutely right. I need to go back to the drawing board. But what Bill said, he says, these PX casks have so much potential. Use them and turn them into something really special. So what I set out to do after that, under Bill's guidance, was make a whiskey that's smokier but sweeter than Ardbeg 10. And that's where I then pivoted, and I knew the PXs were there, but I started to look at the Ardbeg that we had in New Char Oak. So fresh oak from America. It hasn't had bourbon added to it, and that's the whiskey that we started to use. So for An O, you're looking at 3 whiskies all together. And nose it and taste it, please. Don't wait for me. But if you nose and taste An O, you should get an initial burst of smoke, but very quickly it gets replaced on your nose with sweetness, with plums, with honey, with chocolate, with that rum and raisin kind of flavour. And then when you sip An O, it kind of is the same experience in reverse. You should get this plummy, fresh, sweet, chocolatey initial flavour coating your palate. But then it gives way to like some black cracked pepper. And then after that, you start to find some smoke and some intensity and something slightly sooty and charcoal-like starting to emerge at the back. And it's by carefully balancing the New Char Oak. What New Char Oak does to a Speyside whiskey or a Highland whiskey, New Char Oak would add vanilla, honey, caramel. But with Ardbeg, which is quite strong and sort of holds off the flavour, the New Char Oak kind of matures the whiskey. It rounds and softens the outside edges, but it actually promotes the smoke. So you get this intensely smoky parcel of whiskey from New Char Oak. You get this intensely sweet parcel of whiskey from Pedro Jimenez. And then the way that we brought it all together was to use basically Ardbeg 10. So about half the recipe is Ardbeg and ex-bourbon, then about 30% Pedro Jimenez on top, and 20% New Char Oak on top of that. And then the last thing we did, at the 11th hour, just before this whiskey was going to be bottled for release, is Dr. Bill said, it's amazing whiskey. So it was like really great to hear. He said, it's amazing whiskey. He says, but there's a lot going on. He says, there's a lot of flavour going on. I just get the feeling it needs some time to just kind of, you know, integrate, you know, just sort of come together and sort of settle down and just be altogether a more rounded and integrated whiskey. So what we do when we make An O is we give it 3 months after we've created the whiskey to marry. So we give it a 3-month marriage. Incidentally, if lockdown goes on any further, I give my marriage 3 months, but that's a different thing. But 3-month marriage of the whiskey, which just lets everything kind of integrate together, and it makes it slightly more rounded. It only changes the flavour 2% or something. I'm not saying it's a revolution, but it just means you should get this roundness, this great marriage of different flavours inside this whiskey. So you're looking for smoky, sweet on the nose, then sweet, intensely sweet, but followed by spicy, then smoky on the palate. And that's how Ardbeg An O. And the reason it's that slightly higher 46.6 is to make sure the smoke has that chance to be the first thing that comes out of the glass, rather than getting completely dominated by these powerful Pedro Jimenez casks.
It's a mean whiskey. It's almost like a drag queen, powerful, wrapped in silk. It's like, it's going to be a hard act to follow that. You know, we want some more 8-year-old PX.
We're going to find a drag queen wrapped in silk.
I'm just seeing some of the questions coming down. So, Wee Beastie is greater than 10, hands down, which is good to see. On the size, are the new stills online at the distillery yet? Nick's asking about the expansion. No. So they should have been, but they've been delayed because of the COVID situation. We started looking at it, we're thinking there's probably a way to do it. If we do this and if we do that, and if we make people work here, and then one builder at a time works, and eventually the CEO made the decision, says this doesn't sound very safe. He says, and it doesn't sound very pleasant for the people doing it. So it was a brave decision, but it's the right one. It's one I've got to say I'm really quite proud of how our leaders, how the exec at the Glenmorangie Company have behaved. There's never been a prioritisation of production over people. So they just said, we'll wait, and we'll finish it when it's, you know, safe and responsible to do so. So let's hope next year things have started to settle. We understand the world a little bit better, and the expansion will be completed. So in 10 years' time, will we not have enough whiskey? Yeah, that's true, but it won't be. It won't be like a glut. We won't be missing, you know, massive amounts. So we'll still be able to make everything we have to make, but soon. And the stills will be the exact same size. It will make the exact same spirit. That's like a mission that Dr. Bill's set me. The new spirit comes online. I need to make sure it's identical to the previous spirit. It's a batch process, so I'm very confident of that. But I like the fact that Bill's gave me this as something that I need to achieve. It's great to try these expressions side by side from Gabriel. I agree. There's nothing better than a vertical tasting. Like to really, because sometimes you'll drink one Ardbeg one night and then you'll drink another Ardbeg a different night. Or the same for Lafroig, Lagavulin, or for other whiskies. It's much how different they are when you try various ones. Honey and roasted nuts on the nose. Yeah, it's just different palates will pick up different things. There's definitely a sweetness. Nuttiness is coming from the sherry casks. You get that more often in Oloroso. If you get nuttiness more commonly from Oloroso, but you can get it from PX. You absolutely can. And then final question is a good one. So Matt has said, when you blend other casks for other releases, how long do you marry them for? Is it 3 months pretty unusual for ANO? So the whole process of marrying the whiskies together takes about a month, just naturally from dropping your casks, getting them into a vat, stirring that vat, then taking a sample. That sample's then sent from Islay to the mainland, where Dr. Bill, myself, and the rest of the Whisky Creation team will look at it, evaluate it, and let's just pretend it's right first time, and we go, yeah, that's good to go. That whiskey is then put into a lorry and brought to the bottling hall. In the bottling hall, it goes into a vat, and so it goes into a receipt vat, and then even though we clean the vat and we know what it is, we always check, so we're going to do another sensory assessment. It's then proofed down from cask strength to bottling strength. Again, we're going to do another sensory check on that, and then eventually it will be bottled. And that entire process is like a month. So there's a month of marriage for the whiskey, which ANO will get as well, but we just wanted an additional 3 months over and above that, and also in a wooden vessel. So wooden vessels are porous. They just kind of let the whiskey breathe. So you lose about 0.5% of alcohol, which isn't great economically, but it does just allow this kind of integration. So it's like an additional 3 months. So it is kind of unique for Ardbeg. We don't really marry any of the other ones so much. I think it's to do with just, there's so many different ingredients almost. It just takes time for them all to come together. I always go back to cooking. So, like, you know, if you're cooking, if you're doing like a really classic, you know, really nice piece of fish that's grilled and some vegetables to go alongside it, then there's not many complicated ingredients going around. So as soon as it's ready, you can eat it. Whereas if you make some sort of big casserole or like a curry or a chili or something that has a huge amount of herbs and spices and ingredients and layering, usually you find that tastes better the next day or 2 days later, as it's just given time for all the flavours to come together. ANO's kind of like that. It just has so many different ingredients and so many different things to find. That's why we give it the 3 months. Last one here. So long term, how do you think COVID will affect the industry? So it's not over yet. So I don't know, but let's assume that you know, a vaccine comes soon or a cure comes soon, and 2021 is a little bit more like the normal we used to know. It won't have affected the industry much at all. The distilleries tend to only have a few people on them at a time because it's a batch process. You have someone working the mash, someone working the still, someone filling the casks. The biggest challenge we faced has been in the filling stores, which is where warehousemen bring all of the casks together. So we've had to adjust how we work there. And then, of course, the bottling halls. So the bottling halls have been really tough as well. So in terms of actual production of spirit, we've dropped production a little bit, but nothing that can't be recovered over the next 10 years. But what's been tougher has been like the creativity. So my team, Dr. Bill's team, the chance to get together and just, you know, brainstorm, think of ideas, create off of each other, hear someone suggest something and turn that into something else, which after 3 or 4 iterations turns into an idea for a new product. That stuff's harder. It doesn't really work over Zoom. So that's been tough. But generally we're good. It's actually brought our entire team, so the entire company has kind of, by being apart, we've kind of come together way better than we thought was possible. But hopefully by next year, it will get back into something more normal. But in terms of the whisky industry, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. We've been around for, you know, legally, we've been around for about 300 years. Illegally, we've been around for about 900. So I'm pretty sure we'll be fine. I hope. I'm sure. Okay.
Good news.
Yeah. Jack, what's next? Is it Uigeadail?
Oh yes, it's one of my favourites, and you know, trying to hear your comments about it. But
please, because that's something I hear a lot, Jack, which is so true. But why is it one of your favourites?
Oh, it just draws me in. I think it's the richness in it. You know, maybe it's the more alcohol or something, but it just delivers more. You know, it tends to be more rounded and fuller.
I totally agree. So Uigeadail was our second permanent expression. Ardbeg 10 we released in the year 2000 after we repurchased the distillery in 1997, and it was so popular, and people were starting to learn about Ardbeg and this sort of small but committed committee of Ardbeg fans. And if you're not a member of Ardbeg's committee, please go to ardbeg.com and sign up and become a member of the Ardbeg committee. It's where you find out about Ardbeg, everything about Ardbeg you find out first. So after Ardbeg 10 was such a huge success, Dr. Bill, my boss, started to work on the next Ardbeg. Dr. Bill, of course, famous for pioneering and innovating in wood finishing, particularly at Glenmorangie. He knew and was beginning to really understand Oloroso sherry. Bear in mind, this is 20 years ago, so Oloroso sherry cask maturations weren't as popular as they are right now, single malts. But Bill knew that there was something about Oloroso sherry, the power and the poise that it brought to Glenmorangie, and he thought, I think I can do something with it at Ardbeg. So in essence, Ardbeg Uigeadail, which is named after our water source, so Loch Uigeadail supplies the water to our distillery, and Uigeadail means deep and mysterious. It's our classic sherried Ardbeg. What you're looking at is about 50% of the batch is Ardbeg matured in ex-bourbon. So 50% of every batch of Uigeadail is like Ardbeg 10, and 50% of the batch is matured in Oloroso sherry casks. That's quite a lot of sherry. So half of the batch is this big Oloroso sherry matured whiskey. And when you bring the two together, I can't remember who it was that called out bacon on Wee Beastie. This one to me is everything barbecued meats. So I always get bacon, smoky bacon. It's streaky, fatty, smoky bacon, which although you're meant to grill it because it's better for you, we're Scottish, we're not really into healthy eating. So you fry it, and if you fry it, the oils build up and the oils gather in the side of the frying pan. Crispiness of the bacon is slightly burnt, caramelized, maybe a bit of sugar on top of that bacon. There's brisket. There's that sort of sticky, sweet marinade that you put on meats, and when you throw it on the grill, they kind of catch and caramelize and burn. There's all of this sweet, smoky intensity to Ardbeg. It's at 54.2% alcohol to absolutely show off that sweet and smoky sensation that it creates. If you add a little bit of water to Uigeadail, it gets quite oily. So it starts to oil up, and then the texture becomes something altogether different, but you still get that sweet cured meat flavour. You start to get a little bit of, so a lot of people say chocolate, which is absolutely correct. Brendan, you're making everyone hungry. I know. Good news is, Craig, it's 9:15 in the morning, so I'm going to go and have a bacon sandwich and a big cup of coffee, which is basically Uigeadail without the alcohol. You just get this, like, a lot of people get chocolate, a lot of people get milk chocolate, and I don't get that just because that's how my palate is. What I get is almost like espresso coffee. You know, you get this kind of roast coffee beans, espresso coffee, something like that is in there. Again, you'll of course get the smoke. You will, if you add enough water, or if your palate is so attuned, you will get that kind of citrus note coming through again. But rather than being that crisp lime juice of Ardbeg 10, think something like orange peel. You know, something that's a wee bit, you know, like dried out orange peels that have been left out for a while after you've peeled them off if you've ate an orange, or orange bitters if you're into your cocktails. That kind of note is in there. If you don't get it, don't worry. But the big one to look for is definitely something like salty, fatty, streaky bacon, smoked, of course. All parts of grilled meats, this kind of sticky, gummy molasses, Madeira sugar. Yeah, it's, if you're having a barbecue and you're not drinking wine, this is the go-to, I would say. Ardbeg, Uigeadail and barbecue is just like a match made in heaven.
There's so much going on with Uigeadail. And when people used to ask me what was my favourite whiskey, and I'd always just straight away just say Uigeadail, but I never really knew why, and I couldn't say why, but it's just like beguiling sort of whiskey that drags you in, it lingers for ages, and you just keep getting more and more from it. So, I know you can't just say, well, I love it for that one reason. You get so many other things from it, and it just keeps on delivering the high alcohol strength, and just keeps on driving more flavors out of it. There's so many flavors in this whiskey. It is, you know, it's unbelievable. Yeah,
I totally agree. It's something. So switching to Glenmorangie just very briefly, because I make Glenmorangie as well, but it's not quite a criticism. It's like, it's people's passion for trying new stuff, but they always complain. So it is a criticism. I'm just trying to be nice. But we are always saying, why don't you make Glenmorangie at higher strengths? Why don't you make Glenmorangie at 55, at cash strength, at 57? And in truth, it's because Glenmorangie kind of closes up when you do that. So you lose the complexity and you lose the style. So you lose the entire reason we make Glenmorangie. But that's another great thing about Ardbeg. The higher the strength goes, the more you keep the smoke in. But also, because of the way it matures, it's really drinkable at that high strength. And especially Uigeadail, at that high ABV, you get this beautiful roundness. Oh, and there's Fernand's just called out a great thing. Like, another thing you can look for in Ardbegs at high strength is this, something mentholic, so slightly eucalyptus, or, you know, even fresh mint. But that's a great tasting note, this kind of mint chocolate. So it's not just mint on its own, but it intermingles with that chocolate, and you just get something sweet. So usually what I say as well is, with whiskey, all whiskey in general, a few drops of water and it changes the whiskey massively. But one of the things that's great about Uigeadail is you can actually add quite a lot of water and it changes, but it doesn't change a lot. It just sort of evolves a little. So you keep that style that you have at the full strength, but if anything, it just becomes oilier. and it has more of a kick on it, kind of mouth-coating mouthfeel as you drink it. It's the Ardbeg committee, as I mentioned before. I'm sure you're already a member of the Ardbeg committee, but if you're not, I'd highly recommend it. Sometimes we ask, just ask all of our members, what's your favourite Ardbeg ever? It's not a multiple choice, so we're not trying to lead the jury in. It's just any Ardbeg, what's your favourite? And it's like 7 out of 10 people pick Uigeadail. So six or 7 out of 10 pick Uigeadail every time we hold this poll. It's just a very special whiskey. It shows off Ardbeg's classic style, but it also gives this wonderful sweetness and savoury note. Yeah, it's just a great balance of sherry, bourbon and smoke. Something magical.
And we've got a few converts here tonight. I hope everyone's enjoying these wonderful comments from women on shore. And yeah, bring on the Uigeadail. I've got a 4.5 litre actually sitting out the back. I enjoyed cracking that one day.
So, I'll talk about this one before we hop on to Drum, which is really just a special treat for everyone to say thanks for coming here, for listening, for sort of putting up with my blocked nose chat. My accent is probably way better than this, honest. This one here is Ardbeg Corryvreckan. So, Ardbeg Corryvreckan is like a labour of love for Dr. Bill Lumsden. So the Corryvreckan was inspired by a real life whirlpool. So there's a whirlpool, which is, we say it's just off the coast of Islay. Now it's 40 miles from Islay. In truth, it's just off the coast of Jura. So really, Jura Distillery should have named a whiskey Corryvreckan, but they didn't, so we did. And they're furious about that, which is great. But the Corryvreckan is like this super powerful whirlpool. I think it's the second biggest whirlpool on Earth, and it's fed by some water that runs between Jura and Islay. Jura and Islay, near Killala, they come together so close that as the water passes through there, it's some of the fastest moving water on Earth. So on all of Earth, it's some of the fastest moving water. So as a result, it forms this whirlpool called the Corryvreckan. It's big, powerful and dangerous. So when you hear that and you're making a big, powerful whiskey like Ardbeg, you think, we need to make a whiskey called Corryvreckan. So that's what Dr. Bill did. It's about 12 years ago that we launched, 13 actually this year, that we launched Ardbeg Corryvreckan, which was the third expression in Ardbeg's range. So you now had 10 Uigeadail Corryvreckan. Now, if you're going to name a whiskey after a big, dangerous, powerful whirlpool, then the whiskey better stand up to that kind of description. So there's a couple of things we did. So we take our really powerful Ardbeg spirit and we started to experiment with maturing in virgin French oak casks. So French oak is very different to American oak. American oak, which is the only cask we've talked about so far, is full of stuff called lignin. And lignin makes all of these sweet flavours appear when you mature an oak. Caramel, honey, coconut, clove spiciness, anything that I've missed. Honey, I've said honey, it's sort of like a sugary sweetness, buttery, creamy. All of these notes are classic American oak flavours. When you use French oak, especially when you head south in France, when you get further into the southern forests of France, you don't have lignin, you don't have honey, caramel, coconut, you don't have sweetness. Instead, what you have is tannins. Tannins are great for red wines that you're going to lay down for 20 or 30 years. Not so much for whiskey. If you use French oak, if you use high tannic oak to make whiskey, you need to be careful because initially it'll make everything herbal and slightly reassuringly dry and it'll add structure. But if you over mature, if you put too much tannin into whiskey, it becomes dry like sawdust and it becomes astringent. It has that real astringency and it becomes almost unpleasant and overly wooded. It's the most powerful cask really that you can use in whiskey. So with Ardbeg Corryvreckan, the original ambition was to fully mature Ardbeg because it's quite a strong whiskey. And we figured, Dr. Bill figured, it can hold up to the French oak. So he fully matured it in French oak, and he tried it, and it was absolutely not drinkable. It wasn't good. The French oak was too much. It was far too much. But again, just a little bit like the Pedro Jimenez, it had huge potential. So yeah, it was dry. Yes, it was astringent. Yes, it was far too spicy. But thought about, went, okay, this is going to form like the beating heart of Corryvreckan. It's going to be this Ardbeg and French oak. So what he did is he took the French oak and he took 30% French oak, 70% Ardbeg and traditional bourbon, and married those together. And then just to make sure this is the biggest and the most intense and the craziest Ardbeg you've ever had, we bottle it at 57.1% ABV. So I think of Ardbeg, and I hear this all the time, as a cult whiskey, and Ardbeg Corryvreckan is like a cult within a cult. There's people who drink Ardbeg, and the only Ardbeg they drink is Corryvreckan. It's insane. You know, I've met people, what whiskies do you like? And they'll say Corryvreckan. I'm like, oh, so you like Ardbeg? And they're like, no, just Corryvreckan. It's the only.
It's like having a crazy mate.
Yeah. So what you get is, interestingly, first nose, it's not actually that smoky. It's more blackcurrant, it's more fennel, it's more rosemary, it's more herbal and fresh. What to do is, that's the French oak tannins. It's just the tannins are kind of holding the whiskey in. See, if you put a spot of water into Corryvreckan, it kind of breaks up that tannin, and it's almost like pouring water on a fire. The fire goes out, and this massive rush of smoke replaces it. And that's what happens with Corryvreckan. And that's why for some people they're like, yeah, it's nice, but I prefer X, Y, or Z Ardbegs. And then for other people, they're just like, no, I'm sold. This is the whiskey for me. And it's taken a long time for us to understand the right French oak to buy, the right cask to use. In the past, we've experimented with red wine French oak. But about 4 years ago, we really landed the recipe, and it's, you know, it's here to stay. So we only make, of every 10 bottles of Ardbeg that we release, 1 will be a Corryvreckan, maybe even less than that actually, 1 out of 20. It's a very small amount each year that we make, but it's just something really special, really, really special whiskey.
It's really interesting to hear you describing the French oak, you know, versus the American oak, because it's something that I'm really interested in, is the oak flavours. And you know, having a lot to do with the wine world, we often talk about the French oak adding the dry, peppery flavours. And it was interesting to find out, it's just quite recently for me, how much sherry wood is actually American oak, because they prefer it as well.
Yeah, it's 90%. 90%.
Yeah. It's a common misconception that sherry is made in European oak.
Yes, and it's also, that's the other one, like that people will talk about, this is our European oak cask, and I'm like, well, 2 things. I think you're talking about it's a sherry cask because it's a European wine, but also which European oak, you know, because you have French oak, you have Spanish oak, Slovenian oak, Hungarian oak, Russian oak, and they're all different, and some of them are very, very, very different. But usually what you have is sherry casks are made of either American oak or French oak. Those are the 2. And it's been like that since the 1600s. Because I had a very passionate gentleman, let's say, in America, who tried to savage me. And he's like, you've destroyed an age-old industry by sending American oak to Spain to make your whiskey. And I was like, well, it's been happening since like 1570. So honoured that you think that I personally have, you know, destroyed this 600-year-old industry. But yes, it's like that for forever. So, folks, as usual, I've talked too much. So even though I'm almost losing my voice, I've talked for too long and overran my time.
Yeah, well, we've got one more to go, and
exactly. I'll just leave you to enjoy your Ardbeg Drum. So Ardbeg Drum, as you can guess from the name, D rum. So Ardbeg Drum was one of our first experimentations using rum casks to make a different, special, interesting version of Ardbeg. Now, rum cask maturation in whiskey is not that common for two big reasons. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a fan of rum. I drink rum. But one of the problems with rum is there isn't really any definitions of what rum is. You know, so it's very variable and it's hard to tell from region to region how it's going to taste or what it's going to be. So that makes it hard to narrow down which rum do I want to use to mature my whiskey in. The second reason rum is quite hard to use in whiskey is, but on purpose, most rum distillers want wooden casks that are not that active. So they don't want it to have too much maturation potential because it'll affect the flavour of the rum. And again, that means that we're going to get tired wood, which has been matured in quite aggressive, humid and hot environments. So it isn't always suited to making Ardbeg or any other Scotch whisky. It's changing though. Rum quality is improving all the time. Regionality of rum is becoming more recognisable, and the casks are being designed in a way that they can be used to make rum, but also hold up and they don't fall apart after a few uses. So we worked closely with a distillery in Guyana. I can't tell you, but it's on Guyana, which kind of gives you a clue. There's only one rum distillery on Guyana, if anyone wants to know what it is. But we used their rum casks, and we basically bought rum casks off them over a period of like 5 years. We just kept receiving some of their casks, some of their casks, some of their casks. And unusually for Ardbeg, where we usually fully mature our whiskey, with this was re-racked. So we took 5 6-year-old Ardbeg and re-racked it into the rum casks. And every time new rum casks arrived, we'd re-rack 5 6-year-old whiskey into it. And eventually, over time, it built up enough of this rumminess, if you like, to make something that's really special. So what you get with drum is very much like all Ardbeg days. What we're trying to do is provoke opinions, and we're trying to divide up fans of Ardbeg. So with every Ardbeg day, you'll hear people say, this is the best Ardbeg day that's ever been made. And then you'll hear other people saying, do you know what, this isn't the one that I loved. And that's the key achievement of the Ardbeg Day releases. We don't want everyone to say, do you know what, this is good. You know, that would be a fail for us in terms of Ardbeg Days. It's about being slightly provocative. It's about being slightly different. It's absolutely an Ardbeg whiskey, but we want to make it taste in a kind of unique way. And with drum, what you get is you're looking for these kind of bright, estery, fruity notes that come direct from the amber rum casks that we've used. So if you get your nose in there, if you can smell pineapple, if you can smell overly sweet strawberries, what I mean by that is like strawberry milkshake or strawberry yogurts. If you can get the lime juice, but it's been turned up by a factor of 10, then you're on the right path with Ardbeg Drum. It's almost like an Ardbeg daiquiri, pre-made in a bottle is what I get from the drum. What you also get is, imagine those 3 flavours, the oversweet strawberry, the charred chunky pineapple chunks, the lime juice. Imagine all of them being infused into like a really thick vanilla ice cream, and then with icing sugar, almost too much icing sugar dropped over the top. And these are all the sort of like light, summery caramel, carnival flavours that you should be picking up in every glass of Ardbeg Drum. It's still smoky, but it's like the smokiness sits underneath this wave of fruity and vanilla-like flavours, and they are all attributed directly to the golden rum that we used before. It had this uncanny effect where for the first 4 years sitting in these casks, we were like, I can't taste any rum at all. I just can't taste any rum. And then eventually in came this rum flavour. It came in like a steam train towards the end of the maturation. And people are saying it's much lighter in colour. And yes, so it was like, you know, we're talking like 4, 5 and 6-year-old Ardbeg that went into the rum casks. These rum casks were kind of exhausted. So they were maturing it because it's in oak, but they weren't adding colour. What they were adding was this sort of estery rum flavour. So you do get, as Fernand's saying, you get this kind of like strawberries and cream, smoky strawberry and cream Ardbeg, and a pudding whiskey is a great way to kind of sum it up.
Well said. You said right at the beginning there that you enjoy the odd rum now and then, and I could tell you do. It shines through there. You know, a great rum should, you know, express the sugarcane and the fruits and the tropics, and you know, some of the finest rum that I enjoy comes from the Philippines, where sugarcane originally grew, and Filipino rums, just like you just described, are full of fruit and pineapple and flavors and fun. And the Caribbean sort of connotations of rum, etc. Put all that aside, a lot of people haven't really understood this dram, and a lot of people will never get to understand it or get to try it because it's all gone. It's an Ardbeg Day release, so we still have some of it, and it's probably been the most controversial and less liked Ardbeg I've ever sold. I've loved it right from day one, and coming back to it. Hello.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
I'd say that almost all the Ardbeg days are like a riff or a play on one of the three core range Ardbegs, you know, the 10, the Uigeadail, or the Corryvreckan. So the most recent one this year, the most recent one this year with New Zealand Pinot Noir casks was very much the Ardbeg Black was a play on Corryvreckan. Ardbeg Kelpie with the Russian oak was a play on Ardbeg 10. Dark Cove with the deep dark sherry was a play on Uigeadail. So for a lot of people, it's easy to relate back to one of these. And then guess what? If you're an Uigeadail fan, you love Dark Cove. If you're a 10 fan, you love Kelpie. Ardbeg Drum was really different. It had the Ardbeg style, but it definitely took on brand new flavours from the rum that had probably never been experienced before in an Ardbeg. So that is, when we got that, once we got that flavour, we were like, this is ready. This is absolutely ready. And this is why we're going to release it. And some people get it. And a lot of people are just like, do you know what? That isn't what I buy an Ardbeg to taste. So it's just so unusual. It just takes a bit of getting used to for some people. But I bet you over the fullness of time, this one's going to become one of the real cult classic Ardbegs. You know, that's just the way that whiskey works.
I'm going to go back home and drink my Dark Cove.
Because you found out it was based on Uigeadail.
I actually found a bottle of Dark Cove in a cupboard. So I'm basically on like a rotation by my wife. I'm allowed to have like 30 bottles of whiskey in the house. So whenever I come back with a brand new whiskey, I have to hide it somewhere. So I hid this bottle of whiskey too well, and I forgot about it. But about 2 months ago, I was looking in the cupboards for something, and this thing fell out and I caught it. I was like, oh my God, it's a committee release, Dark Cove. So crack that open and get stuck in.
That's a good policy because you always going to knock one off and put one back in.
Yeah. Or just hide them in the garage and keep them in the car and keep them in the office. So, ladies and gents, I'm really sorry, but I have to go. I've got another.
Do some work. You make some more Ardbeg.
But yeah, so thank you everyone, and like I really love the comments. Like the interactivity makes it so much easier. I do love to talk, and I love the sound of my own voice. But thank you so much for all the questions and the comments and the chat. I hope you really enjoyed this, and yeah, I hope to see you all in person soon. But yeah. I'm sure who helped set this up with Glengarry. Thanks to both of you. I'm pretty sure we can do this again over Zoom in the meantime.
Okay. This is like the fourth time we've seen you down here, so we really appreciate it. You're a hero down here, and
absolutely.
Whiskey speaks for itself. So thank you so
much.
much.
I love coming, Jack. Jack, the only thing I don't like about your place is the jet lag I have when I'm there, but I know that's not your fault. But much love, Jack. I'll see you all soon.
Okay. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope this has worked, and we're here to help you enjoy your Ardbeg. So keep in touch with us. We'll have some follow-ups, emails, and some offers. But any questions, just fire them at us. My daughter and I will be eager to just make contact and carry on the conversation. And thank you, my little friends that have joined me tonight. We've had a wonderful night, and I hope you've had a wonderful evening as well. So enjoy your Ardbeg, be safe, and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Can't talk yet.